dear listeners, and welcome back to yet another episode of the podcast that is known as, at least I have baptized it as, Open Book, Open Mind. And I am still your host. My name is Edgar Chaput. We're going to continue switching things up a bit. This may or may not be because I am in the midst of reading something that I have not finished, and I don't exactly want to do a book review, a book conversation about something that I am in the midst of reading. So yes, here's yet another week where it's more of a general topic that has to do with books, has to do with novels, but it's not necessarily one novel. Today might even be a slightly shorter episode than the 25 minute long ones. It's just a general conversation about why do I read? Why is that one of my hobbies? And why do I think it's a very exciting, engaging, and I guess even more importantly, satisfying hobby. After all, why do a hobby if it's not satisfying? Why do I podcast? That's another conversation. Mild spoilers, I actually like the post-production aspect of doing a podcast. Maybe not more so than the actual recording, but maybe as much or close to as much. I love working in the audio and sometimes even video editing programs. It's a lot of fun. But back to the books. I think what inspired this topic was, incidentally, maybe not another podcaster, more like another YouTuber, an American gentleman by the name of Robert Meyer Burnett, who has his own very, very popular, very successful YouTube channel. I believe he's at least a couple of decades older than I am. I'm in my early 40s. But he's very vivacious, he's very loquacious, a lot of vim and verve in how he expresses himself. Has a background in film, he's worked on some movies, he's produced some movies, but he mostly YouTubes these days. And he recorded an episode not too long ago at the time I'm recording mine, in the spring of 2025, in which I don't remember. The funny thing is, I don't remember what the end game of his episode was. What was the larger point he was making? Maybe it was about Star Wars. I don't remember, but in order to get to his point, he talked about reading and why he read, and I think it was how books influenced popular culture, and how, because there are arguably fewer people who read these days, the pop culture landscape, at least perhaps in the West, is lacking in imagination to an extent. As I recall, I think that was the larger point he was making. And that inspired me to spend a few minutes in front of the mic talking about why I read. And I personally, I've been a bit of a reader since I was a child and a teen. My most vivid memories of my youth, at least, when reading became a particularly important, recurrent, habitual thing with me was, oh my goodness, this must be, well, if I'm in my early 40s now, I can't say 20 years ago, but 25 to 30 years ago, quite literally 25 to 30 years ago. In my youth, I would spend a decent amount of time at my grandmother's. She didn't live too far away from where I was. It was walking distance, and she had a bit of a library herself. She enjoyed reading. Of course, she was also of a generation that didn't have video games. And when I was young, yes, of course, there were video games, but there weren't necessarily smartphones or tablets. So not only am I of a generation that didn't have nearly as many entertainment distractions as the youth of 2025 do, but imagine my grandma, who had even less than me. So, reading was a big thing to her, and I would go over to her place somewhat regularly and browse her library, and she would suggest some things, and she was a big murder mystery fan. She loved Agatha Christie. She had the Hercule Poirot series. She had the Miss Marple series, and I would spend summers, not exclusively, but I remember most distinctly a few summers just torching through these books. I didn't read all of them, but I would read about 2 to 3 per summer. And that lasted a few years. In fact, I have a few Agatha Christie's in my own library now. Not as many as my grandmother had, and I am due to reread them. But that was one of the building blocks that got me on my way to where I am now. And I think what's always fascinated me about reading, and here I'm talking specifically about novels, although I do read history books and politics books and philosophy books as well, but I find those are a little bit more difficult to talk about. Maybe I'll force the issue one of these days, get out of my own comfort zone, and try to record some episodes about non-fiction literary publications. That could make for some interesting episodes, and it would certainly push my boundaries a little bit. But at least with respect to novels, they're almost like reading the script of a play or the screenplay of a film or a television show, a streaming series, I guess you would say these days. And I am a big film buff, a big film buff. I've been a film aficionado for many decades at this point. And reading is almost like reading is like intaking and projecting in the mind's eye what this supposed movie would look like. It's a lot of fun. It's extremely engaging, and it's one of the rare art forms that I can think of, at least, where two critical components for it to be fully satisfying and fully engaging are occurring simultaneously, seamlessly for that matter. I should stress this, seamlessly. That being the words on the page. Is this writer a good writer? What is their style? What are the words they're using? Is there a lot of dialogue? Is there a lot of prose? Is it pithy dialogue? Is it somber? Is it philosophical? Is it a horror story? Is it an adventure story? A romance story? A historical epic? A murder mystery? What have you? Science fiction tale? Ghouls and goblins, dragons and knights, and elves and all this. Are super spies, detectives, presidents, policemen and women, doctors, lawyers. The words on the page, your eyeballs take those, send them up there into your noggin, into the brain, and seamlessly the movie starts playing. So there is both the efforts of the author, who took the time to prepare and write and other people proofread these things and other people edit these things, but prepare, write, research, do a lot of research. Surely they reread their own work a little bit, so there's the efforts invested in by the author, and then this almost magical, seamless effort by us, the reader. And I find that to be a lot of fun. It's my own. It's quite magical when you think about it, because the book is the work of the author, and yet, each one of us will have an extraordinarily personal relationship with every book we read. Yes, a room may be described, and yes, a character may be described, or a time of day, a setting, a season, an action can be described within minute detail, and those do help paint the picture in our mind's eye. That's part of the fun. That's part of the fun of engaging in it with a novel, with a book. But even so, if I were to, I'm not an artist, but if I were to draw a visual representation of what my mind's eye saw in a given portion of a book, and someone else who read that same portion of that same book was asked to also produce an illustration of what they saw, they would be similar because we read the same portion of the book, but they wouldn't be completely identical. And that to me makes reading one of the most interesting and unique experiences as an art form, as an exercise, and as a form of entertainment. It's one of the most unique that I can think of. Even a film, yes, we have a personal relationship and a personal reaction to a movie or a streaming series, but the streaming series is what it is. It has sound, it has actors. It is what it is. A play It is what it is. An opera, it is what it is. Maybe music comes close because it's only audio, it's only oral, and our minds and our hearts start thinking and feeling things as we hear music. So I suppose orchestral music would come close to what a novel is like. Which actually reminds me, I believe that's one of the reasons why I've never been the biggest fan of audiobooks. Now I understand why they exist. Not everybody has the time to read. Listening to a book maybe takes a little bit less time than actually reading the book. You also don't have to carry the book with you. You can just play the MP3, play the podcast. So I understand that. Also, some people, just because of how they're wired, it's just easier for them to listen to the book rather than to read the book. So I'm not bemoaning the very existence of audiobooks, but going back to what I was saying these past few minutes, I believe one of the reasons why I struggle to engage with audiobooks is that it isn't my version of the story. It's this actor's or this actress's interpretation of the story. They are coming up with voices. They are coming up with a tone. They are coming up with intonation. Not me. It's not my imagination. It's that part of the, I don't want to say work, because I find the exercise of reading quite seamless, but for the sake of brevity and simplification, that part of the work is being done for me. And to me, that seems counter to what the original intent of the novel was. But, I don't want to badmouth audiobooks too much. As I said a moment ago, I do understand, generally speaking, I get it. I know why they're around, and I know why they're fairly popular. Even the narrator, when you think of it, when I read a novel, they have a voice. It might be a bit of an indistinct voice. It might sound a little bit like my own, but not quite like my own. Of course, it's different if it's a first-person narrator and if the central protagonist is a woman, so obviously it's probably not going to be my voice that's playing in my head. But, that's kind of what I mean, like the notion of the narrator. The existence of the third-person narrator is, in of itself, one of the great, marvelous aspects to reading a novel. Even that individual, this godlike creature who's telling us this story on the page, has their voice. It's the easiest mental exercise imaginable, reading. Because you are, working, your mind, you have to open your eyes, you have to follow the text. There is some effort involved. I would argue still not a whole lot, but yes, there is some effort involved, minimal effort involved. It also gets you thinking about stuff. Maybe stuff stuff you're reminded of, stuff you're learning on the fly as the story goes along. Especially if it's a story about a subject matter you don't know very much. I'm not a doctor, and I haven't read that many books where the central protagonists are, in fact, doctors. So, that would be quite a fun experience. When they're lawyers, that's a lot of fun. When they're police detectives, that's a lot of fun. When they're presidents, that's a lot of fun, or anything. Farmers, bus drivers, just something I don't do, A, as a profession, or B, in my ordinary life, or C, haven't invested that enough time in to really get to know well. Gets you thinking about these things. You get to learn a few things. It also connects certain dots. I'm in the midst of reading Émile Zola's Rougon-Macquart saga, which is, I don't remember how many books there are, at least 15, and maybe it's closer to 20, I don't quite recall. God knows how long it'll take me to finish it. But it's essentially the Rougons and the Macquarts are two families, French families, rivals, political rivals, economic rivals, and it's basically the story of two or three generations of these two families as 19th century France evolves. But of course, what did the 19th century in France, what is it mostly known for, at least at the onset of the 19th century? Well, the Revolution, French Revolution, Napoleon Bonaparte, and the fall of royalty and Marie Antoinette and the king. That's what that part of France's history is known for. But then there were counter-revolutions, royalty came back, then more counter-revolutions. That's why there's Napoleon III was leader for a little bit there during the 19th century. And so, and these things are the basis of how the stories are told. We recently recorded an episode about Yukio Mishima's Spring Snow, the Sea of Fertility series. Japan tends to, for all sorts of interesting reasons, Japan tends to fascinate people. It's a very interesting country. Well, what was it like at the onset of the 20th century when maybe the epoch of the emperors was slowly coming to an end, and the country was opening up, or had just begun to open itself up to the Western world and the global geopolitical, socio-political sphere. You start connecting these dots if you know a little bit about history, if you know a little bit about politics. There's something for everybody in a book, and I find it relaxing. It doesn't feel like work to me. I find it incredibly relaxing. And there are some days where I can't read more than 20 or 30 pages. Either I'm not into it or I'm too tired. There are days where I'll read between 100 and 150 pages. I can't stop. I can't put the darn thing down. All that to say, if I'm going to try to connect a few more dots between how I've been describing about my personal experience with reading this movie that's playing in my mind's eye, it's almost like my own Oculus Rift, my own virtual reality headset, but I don't have to put any cumbersome helmet on, and I don't have to start looking at some weird 3D representation of either the real world or some sort of fantasy world, some sort of science fiction world, which I have. I have put on those helmets once or twice, at least a couple of times. I'm pretty sure I've done it at least a couple of times for games, most notably. And I don't know, I don't think it's for me. I don't feel very comfortable looking into those things and seeing what we tend to see. It probably puts me in the minority. That's fine. I'm comfortable with that. But reading is my Oculus Rift. No cumbersome helmet required. There you have it. That was another episode of Open Book, Open Mind. Remember, we don't need to like the book. We just need to open it and keep an open mind while we read it. I have been your host. My name, it was and remains, and shall remain, Edgar Chaput. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. A little bit different. I'd be curious to know what you guys think about reading. Why do you read? What makes you pull a book off the shelf? So maybe share some of those in the comments section. I'd be happy to chit-chat with you. Thanks always for listening, and we'll see you next time. Ciao.